Hey, and welcome to the Vineyard Church of Lenoir City's podcast. Our vision at VCLC is to see Lenoir City as it is in heaven. This summer, we're studying the book of Ephesians, a powerful letter that speaks to identity, unity, and what it really means to live a life shaped by grace. While we're happy you've joined us here, we'd love for you to join us in person. Grab some free coffee at 9:30 a.m. and worship with us at 10 a.m. every Sunday at North Middle School in Lenoir City. You can visit us online at vineyardlc.com. Thanks again for listening, and let's get right to the message.
There's a gentleman in the vineyard who my father, actually, our family, began in a small storefront church in Chicago, pastored by a guy named Steve Nicholson, who went on to become a rather large figure in the vineyard and was the church planning director for a long time. I don't even know what he does now. But he always sits during his sermons, and I always thought it was kind of cool and relaxed of him, so now I get to do it. And if he's listening for some reason, he can be excited that I'm taking after him. So last week we talked a little bit about Ephesians. We're closing out the book of Ephesians, and we started that message talking about what Ephesians was, when it was written, who wrote it, where Paul was when he wrote it. And so I won't go over all of that again, except just to remind you guys that we're talking about a period of time in history where Rome is the preeminent empire of the time. The Chinese were doing big things in that kind of part of the world, but at this point in time, right around 100 AD, Paul wrote this right around between 60 and 70 AD, but 100 AD was right around when the Roman Empire hit its peak, or its economic, the biggest point that it ever was. And so Paul is writing this right around the time when Rome was the military empire of the time. It was the greatest military force that the world had ever seen at the time, and there were several different reasons for that we'll talk about. But it's important to note because this verse and this section of Ephesians is actually one of the most, or one of the best rather, examples of a scripture that if you don't study the scripture from the point of view of the people at the time, you lose a lot of what this scripture says. And so if you are not somewhat familiar with a Roman soldier, the way that Roman military worked and behaved, the way that it fought, and the reasons that it became the preeminent empire of the time, then you kind of miss some of the very important aspects of what Paul is trying to say here. And so we'll go over just a little bit of that. Let's read the verse first. We're going to be reading out of Ephesians 6:10 through 20. I hope I did I think I did the same version in both here. It says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm." There's more to this, and we'll keep reading as we go. But know a little bit about the Roman military. And again, as Paul was writing this letter, he wrote it with the specific intent that the people of the time who were reading it would have been very familiar with the way that the military worked at the time. And so him kind of casually saying things would have meant much more to the people then than it would now, right? If I said to somebody back then, pick up the AR-15 of the Spirit, they would not understand what that necessarily meant, but you might pick up on small intricacies of what kind of bullets does it shoot? Does it have a bump stock? Is it got an optic on it, right? All of these things matter in terms of how Paul kind of relates the different things that he mentions in the Spirit to the different pieces of armor and weapons of the time. And so know that at this time, battle was really kind of crude. I mean, it's always really crude, and there's not really any getting away from that. But at the time, as you kind of well know, battle was all about hacking, slashing, bashing, breaking, right? It wasn't quite as dirty as war is right now. It was a much more personal, much more in-your-face kind of a thing. You were killing people with swords and spears. You were feeling those weapons go into them as you did it. It was a much more visceral, much more, let's say, mentally damaging way of fighting a war, okay? The Romans were really, really good at this for a few different reasons. There were a bunch of different things, but one of the big ones was communication, right? The Romans were really the first military of the time that, while they didn't necessarily create the kinds of formations and things like that in battle, they did perfect communication among the troops. And so during battle, typically what you would have to do is just scream, right? And I would say, move to the flank, and then the guy next to me would scream it, and the guy next to him would scream it, and the guy next to him would scream it, and hopefully you're not playing a telephone game that by the time it gets a quarter of a mile down the line, it doesn't sound like move to the right? And so the Romans really perfected this ability. They separated their armies into different sections or different designations, let's say, of things like legions, which would have been something around 5,000 men, cohorts of 500 men, and centuries of about 100 men. You'll note in the Bible that it talks about centurions, who would have been the leader of groups of centuries or hundreds, 100 men. And so they perfected this communication, and the other thing that they did really, really well, and we talked a little bit about this last week, is that they perfected the ability to supply their troops, right? They had these really good roads, aquifers that brought water to many different places, and they were able to supply their front lines better than the vast majority of militaries had at the time, and so it's several of the reasons that they became the kind of force that they did. The composition of the army at the time would have been about the same percentage per capita as you have today within the United States. About 7% of the overall population was part of the military, counting legionnaires, the centurions, the officers, the auxiliary troops, the support troops, all of those kinds of things. About the same, and I only say that so that you understand that the military would have been about as prevalent today or about as prevalent in Rome as our military is today, right? You will see the occasional soldier, especially here in Lenore City, because we've got what is it? Yeah, we've got the armory. What is the National Guard? That's it. Sorry. Yeah, we've got a National Guard armory right there, and so you'll see these guys once when it's actually right across the street. I never know which way I'm pointing. That way? I don't know. It's close. And so you'll see them, right? And so it would not be strange for me to say, let's say, compare something in the Bible to the Marine BDUs, right? You would understand what I was saying when I said that, and so Paul had the same expectation when he says the breastplate and the sword and the shield, that all of that had connotations that the people of the time would have understood. And so Rome at the time, again, was kind of the preeminent military of the time. And by the way, the soldier that Paul would have been talking about was a legionnaire of the time, okay? The legionnaires were very specific among the troops. They made up the majority of the Roman army, but they were essentially the special forces of the army, right? Did a different job than like the special forces would today, but essentially the legionnaires were highly specialized, highly trained troops that were designed to stand in formation. They took the brunt of the attacks. They did the brunt of the fighting, or the majority of the fighting, but they had lots of different perks that were associated with that. They were very heavily armored. Rome supplied them with the vast majority of the armor that they had, and actually they were required to use a lot of the armor that Rome provided for very specific reasons. Citizenship was a requirement for a legionnaire. You could not be a legionnaire if you were not a Roman citizen born into Rome as a citizen, for a bunch of different reasons, but primarily because Rome thought it kind of helped with things like loyalty and the ability to ask hard things of their troops, because they're actually fighting for their home rather than a foreigner fighting for somebody who, let's say, conquered them. They wore this very segmented iron armor. We're past the Bronze Age and into the Iron Age at this point, and so while there were some bronze, most things at this point were made of iron and could be shined and polished to a very high sheen. They underwent very rigorous training, and part of what made a legionnaire is the discipline to what we would call, or what Paul calls, stand firm in the face of the enemy attacking. And so what a legionnaire was expected to do was to fight or to die and to never run. And in fact, there were very, very severe penalties and punishments for a legionnaire that would turn and flee in the middle of battle. They were given higher pay, they were given lots of prestige, and in the rare event that a legionnaire actually made it past his mandatory 25 years of service, he would be given a large parcel of land or a large cash payout at the end of his service as a thank you from Rome. The other thing that Rome did really well was battle formations, and I hope that you guys can see these well enough. If we need to turn another set of these lights off, please feel free to do that. I'm going to put up a bunch of different pictures. I tried to mix in a good amount of actual historical imagery as well as some kind of animated things that just for the sake of helping us to kind of visualize. But you can see this picture on the top right shows what we would call or what the Romans called at the time, the Tetsudo formation, or a formation where you would interlock shields both on the sides and over the top. And what that would do is essentially create this kind of turtle formation where it was very difficult to get any kind of projectiles through. You could see on the left-hand side here the way that this would kind of work. The soldier in the front would put his shield down on the ground. He would have coverage. These shields were about 4.5 feet tall. You would have coverage from there down. The next soldier would overlap his, and so on and so forth, creating this kind of impenetrable shield wall that went from the front of the line all the way around the sides and all the way up the back. Lots of different types of formations that you could have here. The Tetsudo is on the bottom right-hand side, that kind of square formation. If they were in lines facing an enemy, sometimes it would just be a straight line made of several different lines of Romans. But again, always with that kind of shield facing the enemy and on the flanks and over the top. Lots of really cool reasons why this was really important. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but just know that these battle formations were one of the primary things that allowed Rome to conquer the way that it did and to move into the world the way that it did. The armor of a Roman legionary was designed to be light and to be carried across long distances. Now, that's relative, right? Because the breastplate itself could have weighed somewhere between 20 to 30 pounds all on its own. The shield would have weighed more than that, being made of heavy plywood and laminated with things like leather and different things like that. And so you would have had a soldier that was carrying around a load between something like 50 to 70 pounds. But for the time, for the kind of armor, imagine a medieval soldier wearing armor. One of the big problems that medieval soldiers had, or soldiers or knights that were dressed in all armor, is that they couldn't fight very long, right? 2 to 7 minutes of fighting in a big suit of armor like that caused a lot of fatigue. And so a soldier had to be able to, in Rome at least, remember that there were no, they could not afford horses for every single soldier, and so the vast majority of marching or movement that the army did was on foot. And so a Roman soldier might have to traverse from the middle of the kingdom all the way to the end of the kingdom to defend the lines or the borders of the Roman Empire, and so walking was a huge part of what they had to do. And so while this armor was designed to be light, it was also, from our perspective, probably really heavy, and let's say, I won't talk for Will because he's stronger than I, but I would probably have trouble walking 20 miles, period, much less in 60 pounds of armor. So Paul, knowing that the people of the time understood kind of all of these things innately about soldiers, they're watching the soldiers fight, they're watching soldiers walk around, they have guards in the city, they understand what a legionnaire looks like and what a legionnaire does, compares the Christian to this specific kind of soldier. And he begins with kind of likening the different pieces of a soldier's armor to different aspects of a Christian's life and who a Christian should be. And so he starts with the belt. Oh, I skipped one, actually. This is a picture of this middle section here is as close an approximation to a full suit of armor that a Roman might have worn. Up in the top right, you can see an actual ancient Roman breastplate and helmet that was preserved. A lot of this armor would have been held together by leather and things like sinew, which would have disintegrated over the ages. And so what we have left really is just the metal pieces from all of this armor. And so you can see the helmet and the different iron segments of the armor are shown there on the right. And then on the left here, you can see what it would have looked like for a soldier to wear it. Paul does not include that little javelin that soldier has in his hand as one of the armors, but he does include that sword, the shield, the breastplate, the shoes, and the helmet and the belt. So he begins with the belt of truth. The belt of truth, he says, therefore take up the whole armor of God, stand therefore having fastened on the belt of truth. The belt of a Roman officer or a Roman legionnaire was called at the time the cingulum militare, and it was actually the most important piece of a Roman's armor. Now, the sword and the shield were obviously not necessarily counted as armor, but the actual armor that a soldier wore, the belt was the most important for several different reasons. We talked a little bit about how the breastplate was very heavy, right? Somewhere between, I think I said 20 to 30 pounds is what I have written here. But it was heavy, and as you would move, this was, again, just held on by straps that you would tie, and so it would move around a lot. So one of the things that the belt would do, first of all, is keep everything cinched tight to your body, right? The breastplate would move around, but if you had your belt cinched nice and tight, it would keep it tight on you. But the other very interesting thing that it would do is that it would take the weight of that breastplate and it would take the weight off the shoulders and put it on the hips. And so as you cinch this belt nice and tight around your hips, the weight of the breastplate of righteousness became lighter on the shoulders of the officer. It became centered more in the balance of the soldier and allowed mobility. It allowed him to feel like the breastplate wasn't quite as heavy as it was. It was typically about 2 inches wide, and by about 100 AD, the Romans had standardized the belt to something like you would see here. It did have some ornamentation. The straps that you see hanging in the front didn't really do much for armor. The best assumption that we have is that it would kind of help with some privacy when a soldier would sit down. They're not really wearing underwear, and they're really just wearing essentially a skirt or a tunic. And so if a soldier sat down and he spread his legs, those would kind of hang his tunic down between his legs and kind of keep some privacy for him. But also, it was meant to make noise, right? One of the things that the Romans wanted to do was to be as loud and as boisterous as possible in battle in terms of the armor that they're wearing. And so all of this kind of stuff that hung down would clink together as the soldier would walk to kind of announce their presence to the other army. And you can imagine in an army formation of 150,000 soldiers, as they walked forward, all of the chinking of their armor would be really quite loud. The belt signaled the fact that the legionnaire was a legionnaire, and in fact, the Roman legionnaires would often wear their belts when they were off duty or out of armor, right? When they're not participating in military exercises as a show of who they were. And so it was a source of pride to wear their belt around them, even in the times when they weren't necessarily fighting. Beloved, we live in an age right now where truth, especially in this country, is becoming more and more and more relative. You can be anything you want to be. It doesn't matter what you actually are. AI is getting to the point where it can fool you and pass the Turing test most times. I tell you now, I will warn you, that there is a time soon coming with technological advancements where it's going to be very, very difficult for you to tell the difference between the digital and the real. Knowing the reality of who you are makes your righteousness light and easy. It takes the weight of doing the right thing off of your shoulders and makes it an easier burden to carry. Truth anchors the rest of your armor. It is the foundation of who you are, and it is the thing that binds everything else together. It is the root of a Christian's life to understand who I am and who God is and who God has said that I am. Pilate, as he stands in front of Jesus, asks a question that I think is one of the best questions, one of the best scriptures in the Bible. It's a very simple question, but a very profound one, and one that I think that I at least ponder on a regular basis. After having questioned Jesus, and after Jesus gave him all of these responses, Pilate sits down on his chair, his throne, whatever it may be, and asks the question, "What is truth?" And beloved, if you are not asking yourself that question every day on a regular basis, if you are not reminding yourself about what the truth is, then righteousness will be heavier. You will not be as nimble in a fight. You will not be able to march as long, and you will have nowhere to hang the sword of the Spirit from. Next, Paul tells us, put on the breastplate of righteousness. For a legionnaire, the breastplate would have been called the lorica segmentata. You can see here on the left a fully preserved breastplate that we have, not fully preserved obviously, but as fully preserved as we have at the moment. In the middle you can see how this kind of would have been worn and would have looked. And then on the right a really cool kind of half of the preserved specimen, and then on the left a reproduction of what that would have looked like. And again, very heavy piece of armor, somewhere between 20 to 30 pounds. It would have been made of between 1 and 1.5 inch wide plates or strips of iron that would have been tied together underneath with something like leather or sinew. It was one of the really cool things about the breastplate, and it's actually the same with the helmet, is that it was not something that a soldier could purchase, but rather, like the uniform of our current military today, it was issued by the Roman military, and you were not allowed to change it or modify it in any way. It was a symbol of the military. Number one, a symbol that you were part of the Roman military and that you were a soldier, and not just a soldier, but a legionnaire. But number two, a symbol of the deep dependence that each soldier had on Rome as a whole. In the same way, righteousness for a Christian, Webster would define it as a state of being morally right or justifiable, following the laws that are rooted in the divine. The same way that a Roman soldier received his breastplate of righteousness and was not responsible for repairing it, for fixing it, for purchasing it, for decorating it, righteousness is the same way. The Bible tells us that we are not able to be righteous except by the gift and the freely given grace of God. And so it is the righteousness that we put on us that is a gift from the Lord and not something that you can produce on your own. It would have been extremely expensive, and it would have been extremely difficult to have made something like that at the time. The Roman soldier of the time would have been required to keep this breastplate gleaming and shining at all times for a couple of different reasons. Number one, because as the main piece of armor that the Roman army or the Roman military handed out to the soldiers, it would have been a significant symbol of who they were and would have been the major thing that you could see as that army walked up to you on the field of battle. And so what the Roman military wanted was for those breastplates and the helmets to be gleaming and shining all of the time, both as a symbol of the authority that the soldier held and as well as a something that was very caused fear, or what's the word I'm looking for? Intimidating, yes. It offered an intimidation factor at the time. Imagine people that are just coming out of the Bronze Age and entering into the Iron Age. Very few people were able to afford these metals at the time. It would have taken, unlike today where we have these big pneumatic hammers and these huge firing vessels that we can make large amounts of iron at a time. It wouldn't have been like that back then. They would have had to take very small amounts of iron and smelt it over long periods of time, and each piece of armor that was worn, each sword and each weapon would have taken a huge amount of effort and a huge amount of labor to produce. And so these were a sign both of the Roman wealth at the time as well as the position of the soldier to have been given something like this. And the Roman soldier was required, the legionnaire was required as a point of pride and as a point of discipline to both keep their armor shining and gleaming as well as be doing regular maintenance on it or looking it over to ensure that there was no damage or ties that needed to be replaced and anything like that. See, true righteousness and true moral uprightness is offensive to those that don't have it. It makes you a symbol as you walk up to them of something different in this world. I have known Christians that when I speak to them just feel different. There's something about them. They love different. They think different. They're not as offended about things. They do the right thing even when it's hard, and it makes you different than everybody else out there. It will be the symbol of who you are, a gleaming soldier wearing righteousness as you walk up to the enemy in the field of battle. The breastplate was used to protect some of the most important parts of the body. The shield was really the primary defensive tactic, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But when the shield failed, when your shield was broken, when you dropped your shield in fatigue or something like that, the breastplate was designed to be that kind of last line of defense to keep your vitals safe from the darts of the enemy, from the swords of the enemy. Righteousness keeps our hearts protected. Doing the right thing ensures that our reputations and those things that are vital to our everlasting life are kept protected even when our faith may fail. You can live without an arm or a leg. You can't without a lung or a heart. The breastplate was designed to protect those things that are most important to a Christian's life, and just as the Roman armor would protect them that way, righteousness will protect the most important parts of your Christian life when your faith fails. Righteousness also guarded a Roman soldier from being attacked from behind. We'll talk about the shield again in a minute, but the shield was really a forward-facing thing, and as long as you were in the formation, everything was fine. But in the cases where you would get flanked, if you were turned the other direction or something like that, the breastplate afforded your backside a significant amount of protection. Righteousness guards our lives against the things that we can't see. When you maintain your righteousness, when you keep it gleaming, it maintains a protection around you that extends beyond just what you can see in front of you, but protects your rear and flanks from the attacks of the enemy. Next, Paul tells us he says, as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. Roman shoes at the time would have been extremely durable, and they would have broken a lot. We actually have lots of examples of cobblers and kind of ancient cobbler tools in all of these kind of big Roman encampments. Anywhere that we know that there were large amounts of Roman soldiers encamped, we always find cobbler tools because these were probably some of the heaviest used equipment in the military, right? Even when they're not fighting, they're marching. And so these would break often, but were also made to be extremely sturdy. The bottoms of these sandals would have been up to about an inch in thickness, made of pure leather. They would have likely been reinforced and would have been made to stand up to those long marches and hard battle. One of the really cool things about these shoes is that they were studded on the bottom. These are not just like slidey sandals like you would wear today, but they actually had rivets and sometimes even spikes on the bottom of them that would allow the Roman soldier to do a bunch of different things. Number one, as they marched through difficult and uneven terrain, the spikes on their feet and the shoes that they wore on their feet kept them from falling. In the same way, the gospel, or the readiness of the gospel, keeps us standing during the times in our lives that are difficult and uneven terrain. Furthermore, a Roman soldier's sandals would have kept their ability to stand firm in the shield wall. So one of the things that would happen in these big formations is that as they would link up shields across the line, the other army would probably also have something like a shield formation, and they would essentially just bash into each other, right? And so I would be standing there with my shield, and there would be another enemy right in front of me with his shield, and our shields would be touching, and we would essentially be trying to find ways to get around the shields in order to poke holes in each other, right? And so one of the things that would happen is, in order to create space so that you could have the space to move your shield and put a sword out, is that they would do these kind of line pushes. And you would have an officer call a phrase. I don't know what the phrase would be, but it would something like push. And what would happen is that for 2 to 3 lines back, every officer would put their shield against the person in front of them. You would put your head up against the side of the shield, and all together, on cadence, you would hoo, and you would push forward, and you would create this space. Then you would pull your shield back, and with the gap that's in front of you, you'd sneak out and try to do a stab and then come back. The studded bottoms of these sandals are what allowed them to do this, right? You can imagine that after a few hours of fighting, the ground would be very muddy. There would be lots of liquids on the ground of various types, and so it would get really slippery. But the sandals that a Roman soldier wore allowed him not just to stand fast, not just to walk on uneven ground, but also to use them as an offensive weapon to push their faith against the enemy to create space for attack. Knowing that we are reconciled to God allows us to march through the heat and stay steadfast through the pain that life may throw at us. The gospel of peace allows you to be steady when walking through the difficult terrain of life. It offers traction in the difficult places. It is what keeps you in place during shield pushes or enemy charges. It holds you fast to where you stand. The gospel is our mission. We are charged to bring the gospel to all who would accept. It is what shods our feet with readiness. It is what allows you, as the great song says, to sing, "Come what may, I will obey." Next, Paul tells us to put on the helmet of salvation. The Roman soldier, gotta remember to flip those. The Roman soldier of the time, again, like the breastplate, would have been issued this helmet. It is not something that he would have been given, it's not something that he would have purchased or would have built on their own. It's something very specific and very difficult to make that would have been given to the soldier. One of the kind of differences between the helmet and a lot of the rest of the pieces of armor is that there's nothing really offensive about it, right? Like the breastplate, the armor or the helmet was designed solely to protect the brain from injury. It would have been lined on the inside with something like thick felt or leather, and it would have covered the face, as you can see here on either side. And there are different styles of helmet. I picked one. We have a very specific image of this kind of crest on the top of the helmet in Roman times, but the reality is that would have been reserved for officers, specifically so that you could look over and find the officer very quickly in and among battle. And so most legionnaires, most soldiers would not have had that kind of ornamentation on their helmet. It would have been, as you can see on the left there, something very kind of sparse, but protective and well-made. And again, it would have been something, as you see on the top right, that the Roman soldier would have been required to keep gleaming and clean and in good repair all the time. Salvation isn't necessarily something you use. It is something that sits on you and protects you by default. Like the breastplate, it was not issued. It was earned by the soldier when he entered into the army of Rome. Salvation is something that you get as part of the club, not something that you can make or you can buy. It denotes that you are both a part of the army, and it denotes that you are dependent on the person that gave it to you for the protection that you need to fight the battle. Just as the helmet protected the brain of the Roman legionnaire, the knowledge that you are saved and secure in your salvation protects your mind from the blows of the enemy. Judgments and accusations are deflected by understanding that you are redeemed and you are who you are. The peace of who you know you are keeps you grounded in battle, and knowing that you have been saved and who has issued you that salvation keeps your mind safe. Next, Paul tells us to take up where am I? Here it is. And take up the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. The sword of the Spirit, or the sword of the Roman at the time, would have been significantly different from swords at the time. They came up with the gladius, which was much shorter and much thicker than was usual. You'll note that there are things like, in medieval times, you'll see these kind of, sometimes even man-and-a-half swords or half swords or long swords that were designed for these kinds of long slashing attacks. You might see rapiers that were these very short, kind of thin, long ones that were designed for quick attacks that would poke holes in an enemy. The gladius was really designed for a very specific purpose. It was designed for the shield wall, for short stabbing attacks that would pierce through enemy armor, and it was made thick enough to be able to parry attacks from other swords easily. It would have been relatively light. The pommel would have been made of wood, sometimes of bone, and I threw this homeschool kid in here because I just like the fact that he thinks he's so cool looking, right? I imagine he built this in like a homeschool, like a project, and you can tell on his face that he's like, I'm trying to be tough, but dang, this is so cool. Just look at him for a second. I don't know. Okay, anyway, sorry. The Word of God allows us to attack from behind our belief in God's legitimacy. It is the offensive weapon that we are to use to strike the enemy down and to impose the will of God against those who come against it. Just like Jesus in the desert as he was being tempted by Satan and was able to parry, deflect, and attack Satan with the word of God, so Paul likens the word and the promises that the Lord has given us to the sword, the major and most offensive weapon that the Roman soldier would have had. Furthermore, the sword was one of the main symbols of authority for a Roman soldier. You could wear armor, you could have the helmet on, you could have the sandals, you could have the breastplate. If you had no sword, your word had no bite. It was the sword that allowed a Roman soldier to actually exert any kind of authority over anybody that he came in contact with. The same as, let's say, a policeman's gun today. When police have no gun, when police have no offensive weapons, they're much less likely to be listened to than when they do. There's a reason that they carry them, and the same was true of a Roman legionnaire when not in battle. They would carry this sword as the primary authoritative symbol of who they were and the authority that they have been entrusted with from the Roman military. If you have no sword, you are not a legionary. It is the only offensive weapon that Paul speaks of. Use your word, practice with it. We have lots of testimony and written history from the time of Rome where they talk about the fact that the Roman soldiers would practice daily with their sword, that if they were not practicing on a daily basis, if they were not learning the intricacies of the weight of their sword, if they didn't understand how to hold it and when it got slippery and at which angle they could swing the sword in order to maximize their blows, if they didn't know how to parry correctly, then they were not useful as a legionary. And so a legionary would have been required under the Roman military to be extremely proficient with their weapon. And if they weren't, they would have been punished. And beloved, in the same way, if you are not proficient in the use of your word, if you do not understand the Bible, if you are not reading it daily, if you are not practicing with it daily, if you are not doing the things that teach you how to swing that sword properly, then you are no good to anybody as a soldier or as a legionnaire in the Roman army or in the Christian army. Lastly, we come to the coolest part, which is the shield. We talked a little bit about how they would kind of stand in formation, but this goes much, much deeper, and I think is really kind of the crux of what Paul is trying to get at when he likens the Christian to a Roman soldier. The Roman shield would have been, again, about 4 to 4.5 feet high. You can see on the left side here, this is a actual Roman shield that has been preserved. You can see that there is a handle in the middle. It would have been the only handle on the shield. There sometimes was also straps that would have been attached behind there so that they could hang them. But there was also a metal cap that would have been placed over that hole that would have protected the hand from any arrows or javelins or anything like that. I'll go back to this. You can see that the shield would have been carried oftentimes when marching on the back and would have obviously been switched to the front when they were fighting. But this picture also has a little bit of the kit that a Roman soldier used to carry, again, kind of all attached to the shield as they would march. The Roman shield would have been rounded so that the Roman soldier could kind of fit inside of it. It did offer frontal, the ability to deflect from the front, but it also covered a good amount of the flanks. And one of the things that Paul would have innately understood and would have communicated, again, innately to the people of the time, was the difference in the idea of a lone soldier versus a soldier in formation. In the United States, we have this very strong affiliation or very strong attraction to the lone gunman or the lone hero, right? The sole survivor, the one who fights the enemy all on his own and stands fast and wins as the hero of the day. For a Roman soldier, that would have been something that was completely foreign, because if you were to stand against 1,000 men as one with a shield and a sword, you would have killed 1 or 2 people if you were really good, but you would certainly have been cut down, and you would certainly would not have been much use, right? It is why we remember things like the Battle of Thermopylae, when 300 Spartans were able to hold off 1,000,000 Persians, specifically because that was such a strange thing at the time. Numbers were important, and the only reason that the Spartans were able to do that is because they used the terrain to force the Persians into a very short, very small, very thin piece of land where they could only attack from one direction. So it would have been very clear to the people at the time that when Paul says, take up the shield of faith, he is not telling you that you are a lone warrior who should take up your shield and your sword and go fight the enemy, but rather that as a soldier of Rome would, that when you take up the shield of faith and when you take up your other weapons, that they were specifically designed to be used with the person beside you in order to maximize the effectiveness. And if you did not stand in that shield formation, the shield did very little for you. The sword did very little for you. The armor was all for naught if you did not have the men standing to your side, to your back, covering you with their shields as well. One of the really cool things about, I'll finish talking about the shield here real quick. We'll go. So one of the really cool things about the shield and this formation is that you were interchangeable, right? So the people in the front, as we talked about earlier, the life expectancy of a legionnaire in the Roman army was very short. If you made it to 25 years of service, you were very lucky, which is why they were able to give them all land, because there was like 4 of them that would make it out. And so you get all this money and land, perfect. Everyone else was dead. So the life expectancy for a Roman legionary was very short. They died often. But one of the things that they relied on, again, was the person to their front and their back. One of the problems that you would have in any kind of battle of this type is fatigue. It was a major problem of the time. Obviously, if you got injured, you would be out of the fight. But you can imagine that a soldier sitting at the front lines would not be able to fight for very long before they would need a break. And so the Romans had a very specific system for this, and you can see that as they would interlock shields here, the guy at the front, or the 2 guys at the front, when they would get fatigued or tired, would call out whatever call they would call, I'm tired, or get me out of here, whatever it would be. They would pull back, and the guy behind him would shink his shield right in front to take the place of the person behind him, the person that was in front of him. Then the person that just got fatigued would go all the way to the back of the line, and it would take him another hour to get all the way back to the front again as the front line became fatigued and would move back. And so in this way, Rome always had fresh soldiers standing at the front line whose faith was fresh, whose swords were ready, whose feet were not slippery, and who were ready for battle and not fatigued from the battle they had already fought. You see, the faith of the person beside you keeps you just as safe as your own faith, and sometimes more. Because when your faith fails, when you become fatigued in deflecting the darts of the enemy, the thing that saves you is the fact that you have people behind and beside you to take the place on that shield wall when you need to take a step back. Christianity is exactly the same way. We are not meant to fight alone. We are meant to fight together and in a shield wall. And when my faith begins to falter, I am supposed to be able to call upon all of you to take your shields, take my place, give me a break, and take time in that shield wall and fight the good fight. We're all fighting together. We're all in the same battle. Nobody leaves the battle. Nobody is gone from fighting. But the people that do the most intense fighting are the ones who are freshest, the ones who are least fatigued, and the ones who are most fatigued are the ones who get breaks. And you never abandon your soldiers, but you do call for reserves to take up the place that you had when it's time, when you fought, and when you deserve your break. The wall meant that when you are injured, you would be immediately replaced by the people behind you. When the enemy's darts got through and you actually got hurt, somebody would grab you, they would drag you to the back of the line where you would be either stood up and they would tell you rub some dirt on it and get back in the fight, or they would carry you off to the hospital where you would be taken care of. But no matter what, the most important part of the Roman fighting system was that the shield wall would not fail and that every soldier, every legionary would, as Paul said, stand firm. Of all of the armor, the shield was the most important piece to the individual. If you lost your sword, you could still be useful on the shield line because you're holding it for everybody else. If you lost your helmet, you could hide your head behind your shield and behind that formation and still be relatively protected. If you lost your shield, if you lost your faith, or if your arm got too tired to hold up that shield, you were useless to the Roman line at the time, and you would actually become a significant detriment, a significant problem to the rest of the formation, because the moment that a shield is dropped, the enemy pours into that gap, and your line is broken. We were never designed to fight alone. Paul would have communicated this clearly, and everybody who heard him would have understood the analogy, the metaphor that Paul was using when he says, you are a Roman soldier. He wasn't saying you are a Roman soldier. He was saying you are Roman soldiers. Take up the armor that protects you and the armor that forces you to work as a unit in order to do battle the way that battle is supposed to be done. So, beloved, cover your chest in righteousness and keep it gleaming. Do right always and hold tight to your integrity. Make your presence known beside all the other soldiers as you march. Put on the belt of truth, which makes the burden of righteousness light. In an age where truth is more murky than ever, tighten the clasps of your belt. Know who you are, and know that God is the foundation that keeps all the other pieces of your armor held fast. Marcus, you can come on up. Shod your feet not in the gospel, but in the readiness of it. Know that you have a mission, and hold to that mission as the terrain of your life becomes rocky and uneven. Use that mission and use that readiness to lock you into place, and do not allow the enemy to push you back and gain ground. Don the helmet of salvation. You are redeemed and you are saved. Keep it polished as a sign of who you are, and protect your mind from the attacks of the enemy. Know that you are redeemed, and know that that redemption has been gifted to you from the one who gives you the authority to fight. Take up your sword, the word, the promises of God, and the wisdom of wisdom himself. Use it like the weapon it was meant to be. Practice with it. Be proficient in its use, and it will not fail you when the time comes to parry and to thrust. Take up the shield of faith, interlock it with your fellow Christian. It is from within the shield wall that you become formidable. It is only with your fellow soldiers beside and behind you that you become the force that you are meant to be. Do not fight alone. Have faith that not only has God saved you, that not only does God have a plan, but that those who fight beside you have the same mission and the same desire. Some will fall, and when that happens, it is your job to close the gaps in the formation, just as it is the job of those around you to close the formation in when you and your faith falter. This is Christianity. This is who we are. This is a battle. This is not life. This is not living. This is not relaxation, although all of those things are good. Paul did not make a mistake when he likens us to soldiers. We battle against principalities and forces of darkness. We battle against those forces of darkness within ourselves. Be who you were meant to be and fight alongside those who want to be that as well. We are loved and we are saved. We have promises of God in our hand, and we have a shield of faith that allows us to deflect the fiery darts of the enemy.
We hope this message encouraged you in your walk with Jesus. If it did, like, share, or drop a comment to help spread the word. Click the links below to learn more or see what's coming up. And if you're in the area, we'd love to see you on a Sunday. Thanks from all of us at VCLC.